I'm DaRon, and in today's episode, unfortunately, Ronald is sick, so rather than go solo, we have a special guest on, Cory. Cory is a former software quality assurance professional, and he transitioned into cybersecurity, application security, whatever you want to call it, a few years ago. And he's actually going to parameterize this and explain why I was a little hesitant how I said that, how I phrased that. But our discussion is actually going to center around how he took what is, I have to be really honest and fair, one of the most logical transitions from one field into security. I think a lot of people will transition from fields that are completely unrelated, but we don't see it very often where you have quality assurance professionals going through and transitioning into security. Part of that is because the security field seems to be afraid of them, doesn't understand them, doesn't understand what they do. And I think that's a real loss for reasons we'll get into. But this is actually one of the most technically related fields. And that transition, hopefully, Cory, you will agree, I think is one of the most logical as a direct result.
Absolutely.
So, first and foremost, if you would do us a favor and just kind of explain how you got into the IT realm. I know that you were working for a major Fortune 50 company. They were a software manufacturer. And if you could just give us a little bit of that background, how you got into it, maybe any high school classes you may have taken, what your interests were maybe when you were younger, and maybe any college degrees that you took before, college degrees that you obtained before you entered IT.
Sure. Well, like a lot of the professionals we have nowadays, I more or less just enjoyed playing on a computer when I was younger, right? I didn't take any classes for it in high school. My high school didn't offer that, but my very first purchase in middle school with money I had earned was a laptop. Dell Studio 5200. It was a brick of a machine, had like 512 meg. It had nothing by today's standards, but I loved that thing. It was a great time. Um, After high school, I went for a different degree, but continued playing with my machines, and eventually ended up going into a degree for networking and computer networking in general. And then I got an associate's in that, and then I ended up with a bachelor's degree in information system security while working as a QA.
What made you actually get anything tied to security in college? Because it does seem largely unrelated to your career trajectory. Did you already, when I was, I'll say your age, when I was your age, security, they had nothing security in college. And we've talked before, I actually generally don't agree with the security degrees, but it's not really what I'm interested in. I'm interested in, were you aware of it as a field? Why would you pick anything tied to security within your tutelage? Was it something that was advocated by the school, by your workplace, your employer?
So it was advocated by my school, but I've always been one to find out what the rules are so I can toe them.
Mhm.
I like to know what I'm allowed to do, and I like to be very technical about it. If you tell me I'm not allowed to bring a dog into my building, you may find that I'm going to try and bring a cat into the building just to see if it's allowed.
Malicious
You didn't say it,
compliance.
and I do it.
Right.
Absolutely. So that's something that can be applied to every level of a computer, right? It's something that's super common. And the more I found that I enjoyed that, the more I found that I could do that on a machine, um, sort of drew me towards that security degree.
When you moved in that direction, did you already have plans to go from QA into security? Were you aware that that was a pathway? Because it's not common. It's ridiculously uncommon. And like I said in the intro, I don't believe that's appropriate. because the corollaries are so immense. So what was your real thinking beyond the fact that obviously the university pushed you in that direction? Did you have a pathway already mapped out, at least in your head? Were you trying to make friends with people in security? What were you trying to do, and what was your goal there?
So I had always wanted to go into IT specifically. I did end up in QA as a stepping stone was my intent. And I took the information system security so that I could bring that to the IT team I wanted to join. Obviously, I never did that. I actually didn't go into IT specifically at all. I found that I really enjoyed quality assurance as a as a concept. For me, I progressed more into security with the application because it my degree was actually for servers and of course information, right? It wasn't necessarily application
Right,
development at all.
right.
But I enjoyed it so much with the quality assurance and the security tie-in that I just kind of continued down that path for a long time.
Can you tell us a little bit about how the transition occurred from going pure QA to an actual security professional? What were your steps along that pathway? What were the hardships? Did you find yourself struggling to explain, hey, this is how quality assurance relates to security, so on and so forth?
Right. So I mean, I started off in QA pretty much just right out the gate, starting with QA. While I was working on my degree, the unofficial nascent security team that was at my former company found out that I was going for my information security degree, and they started bringing me into their security talks. Obviously, it was a little above my head at the time. I was not fully dialed in on application security, but over time they formed an actual team, and I did not join the team. I stayed as QA, and they made the security champions, which like them or hate them, there are things that help sometimes, and I brought that back to my team. Um, I got very lucky that my manager actually appreciated having someone who was security focused, so he did not stop me from doing extra security work that was not necessarily useful at the time. I think the hardest part of going down that path specifically was that while my manager was supportive, the team didn't care.
Yeah.
They had no idea what I was trying to tell them. They didn't see how it applied. It took a long time to get them to understand that the QA work we were doing was security work. It just needed to be looked at in the proper way. There's like an additional step that maybe you do for security that you wouldn't do for quality assurance,
Right.
right? And the more I got into it, the more I worked with more teams because more teams were working with our product. So as I would explain that to them and I would say, and here's your security ramifications, that started to build and the team was able to use those things as well to get more software changes pushed through. Um, I ended up switching from the team I was on to a cloud-based team. And I was actually just the security professional for that. I was QA still, but I didn't do a lot of QA work there any longer. And a spot opened up on the actual security team, the actual application security team, and I ended up joining that around 2019, I believe.
Now, I think one of the most important things about your journey that people should understand is obviously it was never about the money. None of what you did was
No.
about the money.
No, it was not. Pretty much the opposite, I'll be honest with you.
Can you explain why we're both laughing for because I don't think most people who would listen to this probably don't understand why we're laughing. Can you explain why we were laughing, both of us?
So, first off, the company I was working for was fairly well known for not paying a great wage, regardless of what you were doing.
It's true.
And I came in right out of college, so of course, my first big boy job, and they didn't pay me well. And it didn't really progress as a security payment, even through QA. I was just getting QA work. So the fact that I stayed in QA and didn't try to move over to security earlier or go to IT really showed that I was not after the money at the time.
And really, to that point, QA makes significantly. So, for those of you who don't know, he's hinting at a couple of really important things. First of all, QA usually doesn't have a degree within computer science or any related field. Typically, not at least at first, not the entry level QA. Whereas entry level system administration may or may not, but usually if you don't have one, then you have to have all these certifications. Depending on what you're doing, maybe Red Hat certifications or what have you. If you're network administrator, you have to have CCNA or Juniper or whatever. But QA doesn't typically have those requirements. You can go into it with no degree or a completely unrelated degree, like a bachelor's in art tied to the English, for example, English language, something of that nature. Because, and I would say this is wrong, but there's a perception that it doesn't take much to do QA. So they don't get paid much, and that's pretty much anywhere. They also tend not to have much power relative to the developers. But having said that, I guess how fair do you think it is? Because I would argue, like I already hinted at, I would argue it's completely unfair to say QA doesn't need technical know-how. But how would you agree with that? Would you disagree with that? I guess what are your thoughts with regard to QA being technical, QA being technically involved, and QA being able to actually hold their own with regard to their knowledge relative to the development team or the operations team or the security folks?
So I would say there is a place for non-technical QA, if that makes sense.
It's true.
They do a great job at finding these super simple bugs that a more advanced person might bypass because they just didn't do that.
Right.
I didn't click on the bug 15 times because, well, why would I do that? That makes no sense.
Right.
Talk to the non-technical person. Maybe they got frustrated and they clicked it a whole bunch of times and, oh, look, we got an error message. You feel stupid, like, oh, I should have done that. But then why would I do that? I've been clicking every button 15 times.
Right. The common user bug, right?
Right. And there's definitely a place for that. But you can't send that person to go talk to a developer because the developer will talk circles around them on purpose.
Yes. That's true.
And even the non-technical ones, as they get better, if they don't leave for another role, they will become technical. So at the end of the day, your good QA, your really solid QA are the ones that are absolutely technical. They should know the background of what they're doing. They should know the background of how it works.
I actually really agree with that. I think you're spot on. That there is an important role for both halves of that to play. I definitely also agree that, like you say, assuming they don't move on, QA at least should, and this would be even with technical writers. I was actually having a discussion recently with a few different groups about technical writers. I've worked with a lot of technical writers, and similar to what you're describing, they're very good at English, and that is what they know. So at first, you take a technical writer straight out of college or what have you, and they'll be correcting your English, your grammar all day long, and you'll see little by little they'll start asking you questions about some of the things that you're saying. And I had one time where I wrote something very important piece of text. And when I write, I kind of go all over the place because it's just how I work. I don't stay in a consistent sentence even or thought at any given time. So I'm sitting there writing and I start a sentence, and for whatever reason in my brain, I change the sentence midway to a different sentence. And so I actually made it a technical error. I said the wrong thing, and this technical editor who had been reading my stuff for, at this point, 7 years, puts a comment in there, and he's like, I'm not quite certain, but did you really mean to say this? Because I don't think it's right. And I looked at it and I said, by golly, he's right. I had switched in my head And I had even gone back and edited that sentence a couple of times, but only edited it from the middle onward, not even reading the front. And so what I had said was wrong. It was patently wrong. And it's not because I don't know, because that's where he learned it from. It was simply because, you know, it happens. And that's the beautiful part is we oftentimes see people in certain positions where there's allegedly a very domain specific body of knowledge, thinking that no one else can learn that, no one else will learn that. But at least I've been amazed at how much, I'm going to say outsiders, and you know what I mean by that, pick up just by working with those technical folks. To exactly what you're saying, QA will become more and more and more technical. Will they be able to write code? Probably not. But they'll be able to read it. They'll be able to analyze it. They'll be able to understand when a developer is just feeding them lies. And you should see the same thing from security, because many security folks can't read or write code when they first come into it. I think that's a travesty, but many can't. And they start to pick that up, hopefully, over time if they stay with the field. So I think what you're saying is absolutely true, and I think it's also something important for us as professionals to understand. We're not the super brilliant people thinking and talking about things that only select people can get, and you'll only understand if you have this education or that education. Experience is an educator in and of itself.
Absolutely, and then sometimes you'll actually get a deeper knowledge from experience than you would from someone reading to it from a book.
Yes.
The book is going to have a great breadth of knowledge, and it's of course book learning is fantastic. Don't ever let anybody tell you differently. But learning it on the job with someone who knows the job, you will learn things that no one will ever write about.
That's exactly right. That is spot on. And I want to actually use that as a catalyst for the next question. So you moved from QA to security champion. When you moved into that, I'm going to say official or semi-official, I don't know which it was in your case, but role, were you getting assistance from people within the security community? Were you building your knowledge base from reading, from doing? Well, how were you progressing? How did you progress? And do you think it was sufficient for you to then transition completely from a layman to a security professional?
So the short answer for all of that is no. The security team I had knew enough about security to be a team, right? But I don't think they understood it to the depth they needed to explain it to someone who wasn't already into security.
Ah, that's common.
Yes. I spent a lot of my own free time working with security stuff, mostly just reading about it to understand it. I spent a lot of time doing my QA work with additional steps so that I understood what I was reading about in the first place. We did have monthly security meetings where we would bring findings and we would all talk about them. And, you find some really cool things when you do that. You find some very fascinating things that people are doing. But at the end of the day, if they're not telling you how to do it, or they're not at least, walking you to that threshold, if you don't know how to do it in the first place,
Right.
it's kind of lost, right?
Right.
So that became quite a challenge. And it actually, I started working with a couple of developers and some fairly strong QA who understood security in their respective teams and in their respective knowledge base.
Right.
The one that I worked with the most was on the app team, the app server team. He knew just about every security vulnerability you could think of, where it applied to his product. If you took him anywhere else, he was lost, but he knew those. So that was a great place to start building my knowledge of it, and he could show me where they were, he could show me how they failed, and he could talk to the developers who were more than happy to tell me why they were wrong, because they'd already fixed them.
All right. So I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to just plain and simple, honest, don't feel, say whatever. Did you feel that learning through someone outside of security about security, because of developers and QA professionals who I'm going to say effectively brought you up and taught you uh, what you know today, did you feel that that was better than if you had learned it from your average security professional?
That is a very tough question. So I would say a security professional could have gotten me up to speed faster. I would have understood the pure security much more quickly
Mhm.
and probably much more thoroughly. Having said that, by going through people who outside of security, I understood the real world implications that I think someone who was teaching me just security, pure security, might have glossed over, expecting me to find it on my own later.
Yes. Or maybe not even knowing themselves.
True. Very true.
I think one of the important, at least, messages, takeaways, whatever you want to call it for me, and I've told people this before, is that you can learn an immense amount of practical, highly technical security data from non security folks. The system administrators, I have had some of the best that I have ever found were system administrators, for example, who really knew their flavors of Linux like it was their firstborn child. Just absolute insane well that you could extract tons of information from. And just watching them work and then asking them, hey, well, why did you do this? Why did you do that? Why didn't you do it this way? And hearing them explain it, I think that's one of the things that security in general is typically lacking. While a lot of people from security do come from IT backgrounds, specifically, your system administrator and network administrator, not so much developers, but that's changing due to application security. They they seem to transition too quickly. They seem to, a lot of them anyway. They'll transition within 1 or 2 years, and then it's almost like they cut ties, or maybe it's the adversarial nature of some security teams where they don't seem to continue to go back to those experts within the actual operations side, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. I know it's even in that role I was in, it was hard to keep ties sometimes because you're competing, right? It's not supposed to be. Security and development should absolutely be a partnership of, oh, let's make this better. But too many times you do have developers who are like, that's my code. I know it's right. So you end up, you cut those ties on purpose. Oh, well, they were too frustrated. I don't want to deal with them anymore.
Right, right. What are some of the things that you learned in QA, especially with regard to working with development teams, that you think most security professionals should learn or should at least hear?
I think probably the best one I would say is that you may be right as a security professional, but keep in mind they don't believe you. You're going to have to prove it, and you can't be arrogant about it. If
Right.
you're arrogant, you put the back up. You've got to come in polite, respectful, understand that that code is their baby, and you're about to call it ugly. They're going to be very upset with you, and you're going to have to show them how to make it pretty.
Right. Right.
Uh, I've met many security professionals who are overly arrogant about what they can do. And sure, it's very impressive what they can do. But if no one's going to listen to you, what all the things you can do are totally pointless. I think for me personally, like I said, I came from QA. I learned that development doesn't want to hear from QA either. It's the
Yes.
same problem. It's just not to the same, well, it's actually to the same death too. It's just a different issue. So I learned
Yes.
how to come in from a position of I'm here to help you and make your code better, not a
Right.
I'm gonna prove you wrong.
Right. Yes, it's not antagonistic. It's supposed to be complementary and supportive. Although that can be taken too far, and we could discuss that in a second. You you're spot on. So many people, they walk into it without that sensitivity. They walk into it without the understanding that you can be right, but you also have to give this person their dues. They were the one who created it, so they probably know it better than you do. And that's okay. That doesn't mean you're wrong. It just means that there are things that they will say that you have to listen to and then take into account. And it also means that when you provide mitigations, remediations, when you have that discussion, it needs to be meaningful. And like, so when you did QA, did you ever have to maybe hint at how you think things should be fixed?
I didn't hint so much. Most of the time when I had an idea of how it should be fixed, not from a code base.
Right.
I took up coding later, but from a usability standpoint and how it should function, I actually tended to go into there with a pretty solid idea of what would be better. And if I could bring that to them, even if they totally disagreed with it, they appreciated it in a lot of ways because it gave them an idea to run with. Some of
Good.
my favorite developers that I worked with would look at my idea and go, "Okay, see what you're going with here. You're missing a few things, but let's work it out because I think you've got a solid base here."
Yes. Okay, perfect. I'm glad that you described it the way you did because it's exactly how mitigations and remediations are supposed to work in a security realm. And I think that's one of the things that I see too often is security professionals will give meaningless mitigations and remediations where number one, it signals to whomever reads it that you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. You know, you don't know their product, you don't know that language, you don't know that operating system, whatever it happens to be, that environment. Whereas if you come into it with at least something you think would be better, now you have that conversation and you can move them to where they should be. I think that's what tends to be missing in at least a lot of the reports I've read over the course of my career from security folks. And I believe strongly that that's a page that that we should be taking from QA because I know QA does that kind of thing, at least typically, and that they tend to be very good at it. They tend to be very good at not insulting the people outright, but telling them things that they don't want to hear, but that they need to hear. And
I
then,
think something that
please.
gets kind of missed is
Mhm.
that a developer writes it,
Mhm.
and they're going to know that code better than you,
Yes,
and they know how it should work.
right.
And on their machine, it works perfectly.
Always.
But they don't spend as much time looking at a program
Right.
as a QA person will. Because yeah, I fixed that one developer's problem. I worked on that one developer's problem. I also worked on 7 other developers' problem in the same place. I've spent 100 hours looking at one page of this web page.
Hmm.
The developer spent 100 hours looking at one piece of code for that
Right.
web page.
Right.
And I think sometimes they forget that there's more breadth of what I've learned on this web page than you have right this second. Not permanently, maybe not in the past, but right this second, I know where we're at. And I think that's something that has to be remembered by both sides, and it's very useful to bring that forward.
That makes sense. And from a security or a more generalist perspective, and by that I mean someone, let's say you're a consultant or a contractor who happens to just, it's assessment, or what have you, we can actually just abstract that a little bit and say, I don't necessarily understand the ins and outs of your software, just like what you're saying about that specific little bit of code, but I understand how software like this operates. I understand how systems like this operate and how they're contained and all of that other stuff. And so I'm bringing to you, developer who works on this narrow focus thing, ideas, thoughts, and experience from a much broader scope and perspective. I think if if you approach that right, you'll be in a better position, and developers will respect that.
A good developer will. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I like to preface it that way just because you will have developers who are unbelievably arrogant about their code and nothing you can say will change it.
Yeah.
They have to have a catastrophic failure somewhere where they're going to get in trouble before they understand that other people are there to help them.
Right.
And of course, I mean, QA aren't all perfect, right? I've known quite a few who came in with that same adversarial conduct. You come in, your stuff's broken, here's why. Let's fix this right now. You're bad at this. And of course, the developer's upset and everyone's mad and no one wants to do the job anymore. So you have to have both sides, but I think in a lot of ways, QA almost has to be a little more delicate
I think you're right.
when coming forward.
I think you're right. And part of that I would argue is that security typically has big drivers behind it. Huge drivers. Maybe it's regulations, maybe it's industry standards, maybe it's contract requirements, things of that nature. QA, I think, it feels to me anyway, is more easily dismissed with claims of, oh, this is a one off, or, yeah, but that's not really in my requirements, and so I don't really care. I think they hear that kind of thing more often.
Minimal viable product.
Yes, yes, yes.
The bane of every person, really. But QA will hit something that they think is a showstopper, take it forward. They go, well, that's not part of what we're doing right now, so we don't care. It's like, but this is breaking. This is, you can't even get past this. Well, but they're not going to do that right now. I mean, I guess, if you say they're not going to try and log out today, that's fine, but whatever. There's nothing you can do.
Can you explain that the concept in a little more detail of minimal viable product?
Well, sure. We'll give a really exaggerated example. It would be, imagine if you went to release a product that all it had to do was log in, make a database query, pull back some data, and maybe submit some data. And that's your minimal viable product. Nowhere in there did I say you had to log out. Nowhere did I say you had to be able to search. Because I didn't say those things, those aren't part of it. So the minimal viable product will allow you to do a couple things. It's viable. It's just not the full product.
And nowhere in there did I say it had to be optimized. Did I say it had to be even a pleasant user experience?
Right. Oh, sorry. We actually decided to make this bright yellow on lime green.
Yes.
Sorry for the confusion, but that wasn't stated.
That's terrible. It's terrible.
I've seen a few things.
Oh. Okay. So, with all this said, because I've said it before, I think, to me, more people should be coming into our industry from QA, because I firmly believe QA has so much to offer, because it is a perspective thing. It's literally, what is testing software or testing a system other than testing a system? The only difference is with security, our perspective is here, and with QA, maybe their perspective is shifted a little bit over there, and there are some complexities involved, and how you have to prove it for security sometimes can be a little worse, and sometimes it can actually be much easier. But how reticent, or actually, let me ask it this way. How easy was it for you to transition from QA to security? And do you think that there are lessons that you can give based on your own experiences to other people who are trying to do that as to maybe where you struggled and how they can do it better, faster, easier than you did, because yours was a very lengthy journey. Although a large part of that was because you, I believe, loved what you were doing, and it's not like you had a major impetus to shift over completely.
So that's a fair statement. I really did enjoy what I was doing. Um, I loved breaking it. It was so much fun, especially since I didn't have to fix it.
Right.
Uh,
Just throwing
Mommy,
stones
I
all
broke
day
my
is
toy.
easy.
You fix it.
Yeah, that's right.
I think something that I didn't have to learn that I think a lot of QA who want to look into security do is that perception. But I think the fastest way to do that is, especially if you have someone who can help you, show you where there's a crossover. I mentioned earlier, you click a button 15 times, you get a system error, and you move on. Well, a system error to a QA is, oh, that's a system error, that's a bug, we got to report that. To security, that's denial of service. It's literally the same thing. You just phrase it differently.
Right.
Now, of course, there are some that are nowhere near that simple, right? You're looking for code injection.
Right.
That's much more of a security focused item, but you can find it doing basic QA. If you do, ASCII characters and they show up weird, you're kind of doing it there. Oh, is it allowing you to put in those brackets? Yes and no. Depends on what it's doing. You try to put in an alert. Okay, the alert's going to either go off or not. It depends on what you're doing, but that's still QA. It's just
Right.
got a security tie-in.
Yes. Yes. It's almost like, at least in certain things, they're going a little further, because it's not, oh, you were supposed to restrict the character set and you didn't. It's, oh, you were supposed to restrict it and you didn't, and so look at what I can do.
Right. Taking that extra step is kind of what differentiates you from just doing QA to doing QA with a security base.
Yeah.
I think having those examples would have made it a lot easier. Learning how to read code made a lot of difference for me. It's probably one of the first things I tried to do, because if I understand what the developer's telling me, I can work with that developer much more easily. If a developer says, "Oh, take this variable," and I go, "Huh?" First off, that means I don't know what I'm looking at, and they can tell me whatever they want.
Right. And they will snowball the fuck out of you.
Absolutely. But it also means that they're going to have to try and dumb that down, and I use that term loosely, but they're going to bring it down to a term that they feel is correct. And when they do that, they lose that technical knowledge that they could have imparted to you.
Yes. 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 And they also lose accuracy that may be important, absolutely vital to the issue.
Both for security and QA.
Mm-hmm. Completely agree. Well, I want to thank you so much for talking with us, for sharing a little bit of your journey. I hope this is useful to at least some viewers. Like I said, I would actually absolutely positively love to see more folks move from QA, of course, who want to. That I always say that. Those who are passionate about and want to move into security because they feel it's an area that they can grow in and that they would love. I would love to see more of them move over, and I'm hoping that maybe this will help them. If you are in QA and you want to move over, at least one of my recommendations, definitely find highly technical people who can help guide you. Both guide you with regard to giving you that knowledge that you need, the base that you need, but who can also help you translate your resume. Because I don't know about what your thoughts are, Cory, but at least from what I've seen, I think a lot of QA folks struggle in explaining the overlap between QA and security. Even though, I mean, I look at it, I'm like, I mean, it's so close, it's not funny, but there seems to be a little bit of that struggle.
Oh, absolutely. If you don't have the idea behind what each one is, you're not going to know to look for it.
Thank you all for watching. If you liked this video, please like, and please share any comments, questions, concerns that you happen to have, and subscribe. Thank you. Have fun.